we're going to do some quilt binding today. Okay, so I'm going to square it up. Here's my ruler. How you can tell if your quilt is square or not. Let me get this in the middle. Come out a little bit. Okay. You can tell your quilt is perfectly square if you measure the diagonals. And it is 10 1/8 and 10 1/4. So no, not exactly. Okay, but that may be it hasn't been squared up. So usually what I do is don't go by the edge, go by a border. So you want to bring a line on your ruler on one of these borders. And I'm going to set that at about 1 1/8 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 1 1/8. Come over here, usually, okay, oh, this is really bigger. Okay, 1 1/8 is I'm cutting. Is that 1 1/8? Yep, it is. 1 1/8. I'm going to cut here. Now, when I'm cutting this side, I'm at 1 1/8 right here. And I want to usually slide this along a line so that I know I've got a perfect T-intersection. Perfect perpendicular. Okay, here's 1 1/8. Can't cut that way. There we go. And I'll just move it at small enough. 1 1/8. And last but not least, another 1 1/8. Measure twice, cut once. Okay. Now I wonder if I measure it, if it'll turn out the same. So we are at exactly 10 inches here. And exactly 10 inches here. Woo! Okay, that's lucky. Now, if this were a wall hanging, I'd really care about that. If it's hanging on the bed, who's going to notice if one corner is 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 inch bigger than the other? No one's going to know. Okay, so the next thing I do is I want to cut my stripping for my binding. And I cut mine anywhere between 2 inches and 2 1/2 inches, depending on how thick I want that binding to look at the end. I like thin binding, so I usually, for 99% of the time, I cut it at 2 1/8 inches. So here I've cut it 2 1/8 inches. And I want enough to go all the way around. I want to join edges together, okay? Here's my binding. And I'm going to take it on the wrong side and I'm going to fold this down so that the side and the edge are meeting. And I'm going to press it. Okay, using just a hot iron. Then anybody who knows me knows that I am the glue queen of the Chesapeake Bay. So what I do is I use simply Elmer's wash. I like this really thin glue tip, but I've got different kinds, but it's nice and thin. So if you get one of these and when this glue is empty, you just school glue, it works exactly the same. Okay, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to move it. So what I do is I'll take a thin bead, very thin, right along the fold. It doesn't need to be any thicker than that. As I touched it. That's as thick as it needs to be. Okay, then you lay this way, and I know this isn't this. Oh, it goes. No, it went this way. Then I'm going to lay this edge so that it overlaps however much you need to overlap it, so that this remains totally straight. Heat set it down because now it is glue basted together. You open it up and you would sew right on that line. so that when it's done, you open it up and you would have a perfect finish, 45 degrees. Some people will butt it up so that they just simply make a seam so that it's like that. That would probably work fine for this because it has a stripe, a vertical stripe. However, it's best to do all of your seams, whether it be you're seaming together the pieces for your border or for your sashing or for the binding. If you use this 45-degree angle, the eye can't follow that. So it's never going to notice it. Also, if you have a particular print, I do this method because it doesn't have to be 45 degrees. If you've got like a picture that's sort of half in, half out, you could fold this any angle you want and it'll still work. So anyway, so what I do when I start my binding, I'll just take this. Okay, you want to use spray starch. Ordinary 99 cents a can, dollar store, from Shoppers, from Safeway, Aldi's, wherever. Heavy spray starch that sprays on. And you want to spray your whole strip. You want to make sure that you have enough binding to go all the way around your quilt. And then a little extra. So I'm just going to spray this a little bit. And I just want to dampen it, not really hard. Usually I'll let this sit a couple seconds so that it can absorb and it won't flake. Because then what you do is you now fold this in half vertically. I mean, the two long ends together. You, like I said, you do not have to have binding on the bias unless your quilt edge or whatever you're doing is rounded. In order to go around a rounded curve, it has to be biased. But if it's a straight edge and all you're doing is straight up and down, that's not necessary. So I'm just putting these two edges together. The spray starch helps glue it together so that it won't shift on you. A lot of times when binding looks bad, it's because one of these layers has shifted on you as you're sewing it. So like if, I'll use the one that's not wet. If when you're sewing it, this shifts, you're going to get rippling in your binding. And we don't want that. So the spray starch is just enough to glue these edges together. You just press it till it's dry. And over here. Okay. I'm going to press this a little bit. This is the end or my leading edge. And I'm going to take this, again, just like I did, press this. Might even give it a little shot of spray here. And now this is glued together. Let it, press it till it's dry. Not quite. Come on. So now I'm going to start to do my quilt. Usually, like just say if my quilt is this long, I'm going to leave, I don't want to start at the edge and somewhere in the middle, I'm going to maybe start sewing. I'll put this right here, sort of, that's in the middle, but I'm going to start sewing it right here because I need to leave a tail. Okay. Now, what this method does, and this is not my own method, I didn't come up with this. I learned this from Sharon Shamber. That's S-C-H-A-M-B-E-R, and she has a YouTube video called Binding the Angel, and that's where this technique comes from, because you'll get, my beginning quilters can get absolutely perfect binding the first time they do it. Look at these, look at that corner. Isn't that awesome? It's perfectly 90 degrees. The miter is perfect. The miter's perfect on the back too. So my beginning students can do binding that well the very first time they do it using this method. Not because I'm this fabulous teacher, because I'm not. But I like glue. Like I said, glue queen at Chesapeake Bay. Okay, so I'm going to take my glue. I'm going to go from the middle to the edge, inside that 1/4 inch seam, and apply the glue very thin. You don't need a lot. Not a lot of glue. A lot of glue is going to cause problems when you're trying to sew this thing down, especially the backing. And I'm going to put this sort of in the middle. I'm going to line up these edges right here. All that is even, and I'm going to heat set that down. Okay, and then I'm going to take this end and I am going to fold it 90 degrees, so that this is the end right here, the corner. I want this line to be perfectly straight. Okay, and then heat set that down. You don't want a seam in the corner because it'll stitch on fine from the front. But let me show you what happens if you leave that in the corner. If you leave a seam in the corner when you're trying to turn it. One of these has got a funky corner. Where are you? Oh, right here. Okay. This one is not perfect at all. See, that's not perfect. Why isn't it perfect? Because there's the seam. I'm trying to sew extra bulk in here. And this is a matter of, like, do I want it done or do I want it perfect? I wanted it done because I didn't care. So I left it. Ideally, what I would have done has stopped stitching about right here, and I would have moved that seam further down here so it wouldn't land in the corner. That's the only problem with corners. Okay, back to the machine. And I'm going to put the foot back on. I'm using a 1/4 inch foot. So now, this is glued down. It's not going anywhere. And I'm going to sew right on that fold line. Okay? So, I'm going to start, as you'll see in a second. I'm going to start right here at the very end. 1/4 inch stitch right here. Okay? And I'm just going to sew first about an inch or so. At a 1/4 inch. I'm just using this 1/4 inch guide. And that's all I'm going to sew for just a few inches. Because then what I'm going to do here, over here, is I'm going to fold this over. And I'm going to fold this over. And guess what? It's going over too far. Can you see that? See how this is? If I fold this and I fold this so that it completely fills the binding, look, I don't like that. That doesn't look good. So I'm going to come back and sew this 3/8. Okay? Okay, and I'll do that again until I get the width that I need. Okay, and now when I take this, see how, I don't know if you can see the 2 layers. I don't have to take that out. That's fine. Now when I turn this over, and that's a little too short. So what I'm going to do is sew in between them. So as this foot, let's see if you can see. There's the foot. There you are. Let me put this under here so you can see the whole foot. Okay. The first one I sewed right here. The second one I sewed right here. This one was too small. This one was too big. So I'm going to sew right in between to give me something a little different. And this actually is dependent upon how thick your batting is and how thick your fabric is and all that. So I'm going to go in between and so it's halfway. I'll take that outside one out later. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch. You can see this until my needle hits this line. Okay, and then I'm going to turn this and stitch off. these few stitches out. I'm sitting here. And I'll bet you it'll be just right. I don't have the sewing glasses on. And they're only across the table. You think I'm going to go get them? No! Okay, let's take it out from this side. There it goes. Okay, it's out. Okay, so now, let's see what this one looks like. So as I turn it, just right. Okay, this is completely filling the binding, and it's not leaving a gap. Although I have a trick to fix it if you end up with the gaps. Okay, so now we're going to go back over here. Okay, so we take this, we come up this way, and I'm going to give it another press. And then I'm going to fold this end right here. Okay, I want to see just a hair of a stitch. I don't want this overlapping like that, and I don't want it down here. I want to just barely see that corner, just barely. Okay, and then I'm going to line up this edge and give it a little press just to set that corner. And now I'm going to set the glue all the way to the other end. So I'll turn this way. Okay, so I'm going to set the glue here all the way to this edge. Okay, and then set this right at the edge. And set that flat. And heat set it into place. Okay. Then I'm going to take this edge, fold it up, straight, heat set. Okay, and now I'm going to stitch to this corner. Cool off. Come on, there we go. And I'll just mark this. It's too hot. Okay. Come here. Okay. Now, notice right here. So if I'm using a 1/4 inch seam, I would sew to here. 3/8 here. Even though I was sewing a 1/2 inch seam, as soon as that needle hits this diagonal point, that's where I'm going to stop and pivot. And so now I'm going to go to the machine, and I'm going to just, and again I'm going to do the same 3/8, same 3/8 halfway between 1/4 and 3/8. And I'm just going to sew. This actually allows you to sew pretty fast. Okay, find it. One more. There we go. And it's, can't hardly see it in there, but it's right, that needle's right on that line, and sew off. Okay. And look, we're getting a nice perfect corner. But I'm just sewing the other edges now. So, like I said, usually I don't even have to mark it because I can usually see the crease. But anyway, let me get this sewn really quick so we can go on to the important part, putting it together. Putting one into the other. While it seems to take a little longer in order to put the glue on there, you'll actually save a lot of time because you can sew like your hair's on fire to get this binding done. Okay. Do one. Glue it. It's actually, even though you're taking the time getting up, going to the ironing board, up and down, it's actually faster because you will speed up in whenever you're when you've got a bigger quilt. Slow like this, probably the same time. Okay. And mark it. Okay, now I'm back to this side. And then we'll come up on the end. Okay, and now the last little section. So I would again do this for the last, this is the last corner. I'm pulling this down here. Okie doke. And the glue right here. I'm just gonna sew it that little bit. Okay. Now back to here and to sew this last little bit. What I was saying is why this gluing down this long side is important. Gluing it as you're sewing, going along this edge right here is important, because if you don't, what happens is as you sew, let's see, lost it, there we go. As you sew, this has a tendency to stretch unless it is glue basted down. And putting pins makes it lumpy. The clips, I don't really like those, because then what happens is if this is tighter than this, you're going to end up cupping. You're getting like a cup. I don't have a quilt up that has any. Do I? No, of course not, because I'm looking for one. Whenever you see a quilt hanging and it sort of makes a little cup at the end, then what that happens is that this binding and this binding is too tight for the border. And it is stretching it, and then when you're done sewing, it retracts up and it makes that little cup. So you won't get any cupping here. Okay, so now we're ready to join these two edges. Okay, so what I do, now this is where I differ from Sharon Schomburg a little bit. Okay, pull that apart. She has you put glue on both sides. I'm not that coordinated. I can't do both sides at one time. I can do one. So I will line this up, and I can line that up, and I'm going to just put a little bit of glue just along this side of the fold only. And so that it goes, and I'm matching that top really nice. Heat set that in. Okay, and then I take scissors. Now here I know it's got, here's the other end. I know it's got to go to at least right there, so I'll just chop that off right there. About right there. Okay. Then I will open this up. In fact, I need to take some of this out. I sewed too far. You put this, I'll put the glue on this other edge. Tuck it inside. Glue it and heat set it. Okay, so now we've got these two edges glued together. Okay, then we're going to open them up. So I will start over here. Sometimes if you use too much glue, it's a little hard to open. So I know I'm going to open that part. Flip it up and open this bottom part, flip it up, and then when I flip the two ends, there. See, it's a little short, it's hard to see this. Okay, there we go. These match at 45 degrees, okay? I'm going to sew right on that fold line. Let me mark it. And in tight quarters like this, it's going to be interesting sewing it together. See that line? I'm just going to sew right on that line. So I'm going to come over here so you can see this really well what I do. Because I am in tight quarters. So I will usually pin these edges together or clip them just to keep it from fighting me. Okay. Then I will sew right on that line from the, and I'll shorten my stitch length to about 1.5 because I'm not going to back tack, and I'm going to sew right on the line to that center, and I'm not going to worry about what's going on the rest of it. I'll fix that. Okay. When I'm in the center, then I'll come over here and straighten this side out because, like, remember, I don't have much room here on this one because it's so close together because it's little. And then sew right to the edge and off. Okay? So now I'm going to pop the seam open because this is easier done before. Pop the glue, open the seam. Usually I finger press it at this point. I'm not being too picky. I'll finger press that, and I'll chop off these 1/4 inch seams. I'll trim this down to 1/4 inch or somewhere around there. What's that coming from over here? So now I'm going to remove the clip. I've got that straightened out, and so pop it closed. Perfect join. So now I'll press it. Now if it's a large one, I would take the glue and glue underneath and glue in the layers so it won't pop out. Glue it down and heat set it in the down position, and then I'm going to just sew from one end to the other, where I left off here to where I picked up here, so a little further because this is small, and I don't have to back tack. Perfect. Those scissors again. Okay, so now now it's ready to finish the binding. Okay, I am going to, do I dare? Yeah, let's do it. Machine. Okay, I like to press them open. Take your scissor and force the tip into the corner just to press those open. Okay, now we're ready to put them to the back. Okay, so when I usually prefer this to be hand done. I'm not a big fan of machine stitch in the ditch. So what I do when I am sewing, I will do a ladder stitch. So I'll take a thin needle and I will sew here, 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 here. I will sew until I get to this corner, and I will put a knot in the corner. Then I will fold this. Here, I'll put a clip. Okay. And then I will fold this side, and I'll play with this corner with a pin or whatever until I get these edges just right. Here, I'll press it this way. Clip here. And then so usually I'll take, as I'm sewing, I'll just sort of move this until these match right there. And I don't have my pins with me. Who knows? Okay. I don't know what I did with them. Okay, so I'll show you right there. I'll just hold it in place and see how perfect that is. Then I usually, my needle goes here, I go up, pull it through, go through this side, sew this edge of the miter down, put the needle through back this way, and then continue along the way. Now, if I want to do this by machine, and this is just going to be a placemat, so I'm not really caring too much. Guess what we're going to use again? Glue. Not a lot of glue. I've had some students that go completely glue crazy, and then it's a big icky mess. So I will just do a little at a time. Again, inside the seam line, you just need a tiny bit. Okay, and I'm going to fold that so that it just covers the stitching. And I'm not going to try this corner yet. I'm just going to heat set this middle. I'll play with these corners later, or I will just stitch those corners by hand. If you don't want to do, if you want to do the very minimum, then don't try to sew those corners, because yeah, I'm too perfectionist to. I'll do those by hand because I'm not liking that at all. Okay, glue here. Right inside, as close to that seam line on the inside of the seam as you can get. There's a thread. Because the scissors are on the floor again. Okay. I'll get that part, then come back over here, adjust this, just nice, put in a squeegee of glue. You don't want to put a lot of glue, because a lot of glue is going to end up, you know, being too stiff to go for your needle to go through. Like I said, I'm not liking that. I'm going to come back. I'm not going to stitch to there. I'll come back and fix that corner. And I'll do that by hand. Okay, and again, this is the last edge. Now this one is filling, the batting is filling the binding really well, so I don't have to do anything. One of my very first show quilts, I had submitted it, and of course a lot of these shows, they don't tell you much of anything when they send the comments back. It said, your binding's not right. That told me nothing. So my dear friend Shoko, who is like won everything on earth, she is like the best quilter in the entire world that I know, said, oh, just fill it. I'm like, what do you mean fill it? You take little strips of batting, and before you sew this down, you stuff it with the, wait a minute, you can't see what I just did, okay? So like say over here, okay, it didn't fill. You take little strips of batting and then you just fill it. You would take, you know, however thick you need, and then you just fill it in there and then push that over, and now it's filling really well. No one will ever know that you didn't fill that binding absolutely perfectly. And I have done that on a show quilt because my bindings are not always perfect. Okay, and then now he'd set this end. And here's one of my little secrets, okay? A lot of times I make samples for the store so quick, I don't have time to do the hand sewing. Usually I just glue it. And there were some quilts, and there's probably some in the store right now that have been glued like this, and they've been there for years, and I haven't stitched them yet. So I wouldn't do that, because if you wash it, all that's going to come out. But yeah, I've cheated before. Well, it's not cheating. There's only, you know, it's that being the expert thing. You know what the difference is between an expert and a novice sewer or quilter or whatever? Nothing. You make the same stupid mistakes you made in the first 2 weeks you were learning to sew. You just know how to cover them up. So I don't consider it cheating. I consider it covering it up. Okay, so again, now I will sew this stitch in the ditch, and there's so much stitch in here, so much starch in here, I don't have to worry. I would like those glasses, but I don't know where they are. Okay, and I'm going to stitch in the ditch right here. Let me go a little bit longer stitch length. And this I will do fairly carefully. You could also do a decorative stitch going on both sides if you didn't get it just perfect. There we go. Turn. Am I catching it? Yep, I've caught it. Yeah, see, I don't like that. It helps to put the press foot down, doesn't it? Catches. You could use a stitch in the ditch foot if you have one. I don't have a stitch in the ditch foot for this machine, so I'm just eyeballing it. A stitch in the ditch foot does make things go faster. And last. Did it again. Keeps getting caught on the edge of the tape. Oh, that's not in there right. That's why. It's lifting up the edge of my fabric. I'll just cut it for now. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Oh, not too bad. Yeah, I don't like it. And I missed here. And this is exactly why I don't like them done by machine. I will probably tear all this out and put it all in by hand, because if you see when it's done by hand, let's get this one. You almost can't tell the front from the back, because if you can sew in the, you know, if you can just, this is a ladder stitch. I'm sewn in with a ladder stitch, and here's the front. You really can't tell that much difference, and I don't see any of that mess going on. And see, here's those miters. They don't have to be sewn shut unless I do them, and then I will have a fit if they're not sewn shut. So you can see we're real close. If you ever send it for competition, you have to sew those miters shut. So let's see. Anything else on binding? That's pretty much it. Now you can see the whole thing. And see, it just looks a lot better. It's nice and square. The corners are perfectly 90 degrees. Everything looks really good on this.